Great.
Can you hear me? Yes. Very good. Thank you, Pastor Pavel. All right. So yeah, Pavel asked about a little while back about sharing sort of my perspective and insight regarding uh, modern technology and sort of the impact on culture, society, and even the church, right? The body. Um, and so I did, again, pray about and I realized that there was actually quite a few things that would be useful for us as the body to be aware of, to know with regard to sort of what's happening, what's occurring in the world around us, how we may be impacted, how we may be affected, and so we decided that we would go ahead and present a sort of a series of sermons here. I'm thinking three should be able to be sufficient, because I realized that there's actually quite a lot of I would say complexity that is involved in this that would be again useful to try to address and come to terms with, and just have an understanding about, right? Because here's the thing, right? We will inevitably hear about this, right? It's just because again of being in the world and doing the things we do. At the very least, if you don't necessarily interact with this directly, you will be affected by it. We will all be affected by it because again, this is just the nature of technology, right? It becomes, when it's new, it's introduced, it's novel, and people kind of hype it. But then it kind of the hype sort of dies down and it just becomes sort of commonplace, right? You can say that about just about anything. And so I think it's good if we, like I say, have a realistic understanding of this, not based on hype, not based on any emotion, not based on fear or anything like that, or hyper optimism or anything like that. Just to have a very factual basis for an understanding. So that's what we're going to try to do here. I'm going to try to present, hopefully, to you some of the facts and again, my sort of perspective. Just a little bit about my background for those who are not familiar. My background is in IT. I've worked at various companies in various positions with regard to technology support. I was a teacher for IT for 20 years. At the moment, I work for Miami-Dade College, but not as a teacher. I kind of did a sort of a transition into more of a support or administrative role, sort of behind the scenes. And what I do right now, currently, it turns out I'm part of what's known as the LMS admin team. I know sure that means a lot to you. LMS just means Learning Management System. It's describes the system that's used to host the content which is used to deliver online learning. Okay, so it's the web servers and systems. We happen to use a system called Canvas. Some of you may be familiar with it. And so I am part of the team that helps administer that. And so what I end up doing on a daily basis, it turns out, actually is quite a bit of programming, actually. Okay, so that's kind of become, within the last few years, that's kind of become my focus, is on programming and how to streamline some of our processes that we do, again, sort of on the back end. And so, of course, inevitably, in my particular role and position, it was inevitable that I would encounter this sort of reemergence of this technology, this artificial intelligence is the description. And Miles, go ahead and start the presentation there. So let me just kind of jump right into this here. Okay, so as I was preparing, I wanted to give a as descriptive of a title to these messages as I could, and so I came up with this phrase. Some of you might have heard it, some of you may have no idea. It's a Deus ex machina. Okay, it's Latin. Okay, so there's your Latin lesson for the day, maybe for the year. That's and this phrase had always kind of caught my imagination. I find it's a very evocative description. Deus ex machina, and what it means, a literal translation means God from the machine. And at first you might think, well, well, that sounds like such a modern description. How is this something that came out, in Latin? And it describes something both on a very literal sense, but also very figuratively. So let me explain exactly what the expression means. Deus ex machina. Go ahead, Miles. Okay, and so the literal meaning of it, God from the machine, had to do with ancient Greek drama. And the idea was in certain kinds of stories, they would have to have a representation of a god. Okay. And the actor who was portraying this would have to be presented onto the stage using a crane. Okay. So this ancient crane mechanism. Okay. That was the machine. And so, sort of post facto, after the fact, those who would look and analyze this type of literary form would describe this methodology, if you will, as a Deus ex machina, God from the machine. The idea of literally presenting this God figure, okay, using this machinery, using this mechanism. And in what ended up happening was, in literary terms, it came to describe something that would represent sort of this contrived solution, okay, whatever that would be. So like if somebody was writing a story and right at the end, all of a sudden something would happen that didn't necessarily have any kind of precedent in the story itself. It would just suddenly appear like, oh, okay, well, this thing happened and then everything was solved and we all lived happily ever after. Okay. And so the term, the description, Deus ex machina, came to be used in a sort of almost like a critical or a negative way to indicate sort of almost shall we say, lazy writing. Like, well, gee, you couldn't really come up with a better way of resolving, this whatever dilemma or conflict. So you just kind of came up with, oh, well, we'll just have God from the machine. We'll just have this thing appear and solve everything. Okay. And so that expression, again, sort of caught my attention because to me, it really describes a lot of what's happening now with various people's ideas and expectations and assumptions about technology, about the machine, okay, about somehow like this is going to provide all the solutions, okay, to all the ails of mankind. And so the thing that I want to try to emphasize and impart to us is that we as believers should not ultimately be relying on Deus ex machina, on God from the machine. We rely on an actual God, the God, right? That is the source of our comfort, our solutions, our anything that we rely on for for any kind of resolution of challenges in our life. Okay, go ahead, Miles. Okay, here's a visual representation, by the way, just to kind of help you sort of see this a little more vividly. Again, the literal sense of Deus ex machina would be when they would again have this actor who is trying to portray this sort of God element in the story being literally lifted onto into the scene, into the stage by this crane, by this mechanism. Okay, and so again, in that literal sense, okay, it was just that, oh well, we need this intervention, we need this God to come in and just fix everything. Okay, And again, it's like I say, in a sort of literary sense, the idea of just coming up with a story element that, again, wasn't even necessarily supported by what occurred previously in the story. Okay, but it's all of a sudden just magically, oh yeah, we're just going to have this thing occur. No, not necessarily with any kind of explanation, right? Just like, well, this is how we're going to resolve this. Okay, fine. So the idea of this sort of contrived solution, and again, I think it very much applies to a lot of the current sort of attitude and like I say, assumptions of sort of what this technology is going to do for us. And so like I said, I want to, as much as possible, present as a balanced view. Okay, and again, you can imagine, like with anything else, there's extremes with this, right? I'm not here to declare that artificial intelligence is going to be the end of the world. I'm not here to say that we're going to have Terminator or anything like that. But at the same time, I want us to understand that there are some serious aspects to it. It's not just this sort of innocuous thing that's just happening it's not going to really bother anybody. Real people are being affected and impacted by it very directly in sometimes negative ways. And so I want us to understand that, the hows and the whys of some of that. Go ahead. Okay, so let's define this. What is artificial intelligence exactly? You can kind of surmise just from the term sort of what that is meant to indicate, but ultimately it has to do with as it describes here, being able to imitate intelligent human behavior from machines, from computers and robots or what have you. The idea of imitating. Okay, and so again, like the term itself, it tells you right there, it says it's artificial. So it's not real sense that we would think of as like a human being, with the complexities of how our mind and hearts and souls work. Okay, this is the idea of somehow, for various reasons, trying to simulate or replicate that. Okay, in something else, in something that's not a human being. Okay, so that's what the term really describes. So it can describe the ability for a machine to do this. It also describes the software. These days everything's driven by software and hardware, right? And so you'll often hear when people are talking about this and describing using, I used AI to do this or that. Typically, they're talking about referring to specific implementations of the technology, of the software and hardware that has presumably these capabilities. And so, like I said, ultimately, what I'm seeing, what I'm observing, is there are many who, as they're approaching this, as they're looking at this, to me, in a sense, they're treating this as this like Deus ex machina, this God from the machine, this thing that's going to provide all these solutions, these contrived solutions. And to be fair, there's some grounds for that. Again, the technology itself, what it's capable of, I'll tell you, it can be somewhat impressive. What it can do, what it can produce, it's actually relatively impressive. And it just, it ultimately represents the ability for humanity, for humankind, to create things that can potentially be useful. The term itself, just a little bit of history there. The concepts behind it originated back in like the 30s and 40s. Some of you might have heard of a scientist named Alan Turing. Okay, he really helped formulate a lot of the preliminary ideas behind the concept of a machine, of a computer or a robot being able to somehow learn. That kind of became this key concept. The idea of, can an artificial mind learn like a human being learns, information and retains it and then uses it? Can a machine do something similar? Turns out that it can to a degree. Okay. And so in the 1950s, the actual term to describe what they were developing and researching, somebody just came up with, well, let's refer to this concept that we're describing as artificial intelligence, and so that kind of stuck. Go ahead, Miles. So here's some early examples of how artificial intelligence manifested, okay, in real life. So you have these machines, these computer systems, right, that had an ability to, like I said, imitate what you might think of as intelligence, as acting somewhat autonomously and in a sense making decisions, right? So there was a decision-making process, and computers do that. Computers based on just the basics of, for example, like binary logic, can make decisions because it comes down to literally on or off, yes or no, true or false, right? So there is that, in that that very basic sense, there is this decision-making process that can occur. You've got up there in the left corner, you've got this program known as ELIZA. I think it came out back in the early 60s. It was an early form of what's known now as a chat bot. Okay, that's what people typically interact with nowadays, actually, right? On your computers, on your devices, as you type things in for texting, whatever, and you get responses back. That's known as a chat bot. Well, back then somebody came up with this idea, and this is before we had things like the internet and all this kind of stuff. And so it was a self-contained system. And what he was doing was he was just trying to experiment to see, can a computer take input, process it, analyze it, and provide feedback, provide output in a way that would seem, again somewhat realistic, somewhat human. And the system, again, this is something that people are grappling with, and my conclusions ultimately are that there's not real, in the human sense, there's not real thinking or analyzing involved. There is thinking, analyzing, but not in the human sense. And I'll try to explain that more as we go along. Anyway, all these other examples represent, again, sort of iterations of them designing systems that, again, would produce results that would appear to be, shall we say, somewhat human. You've got robots that have sensors, for example, and they can then be designed to respond to the input from those sensors. So you can have a robot that would detect its surroundings and respond to that, right? Can maybe navigate terrain, things like that. Down there in the lower right, some of you may remember, because this was in our lifetime, this was, I think, 1997 or so. There was a big computer that IBM built called Deep Blue, and they set it up to play chess against the world champion at that time. It won, by the way. So I guess maybe that's not a big surprise. I mean, it's a computer, right? But no, so these are systems that have existed that, again, have this ability to appear to think, to have intelligence, to respond in a more or less human way, and yet there's some aspects that maybe that are missing that would allow us to designate them as real or human in any sense. Go ahead. Okay. Now, in the popular culture, of course, right, we have a tendency to dramatize this to a large degree. Some of you, I know this will come as a surprise to some of you, but I'm kind of a sci-fi geek, and so I this stuff, I find it very interesting, very entertaining. It engages my imagination. And, you've got all sorts of, like I say, manifestations, representations. People come up with all sorts of interesting ideas about sort of how this technology, how this artificial intelligence, what is that going to look like, and what's it going to be able to do, and how's it going to be able to present itself to us and interact with us. Some of that is maybe closer to reality than others. We're not quite at the stage of, maybe R2D2 and C3PO, or even Data or Terminator, but maybe more on the lines of, again, the actual, physical computers that, again, have certain logic capabilities. Okay, but this is, this represents sort of the visions, if you will, of different people, of sort of what the future might look like, and we may get there. You never know. They're certainly working on it. You can see a lot of concerted effort to try to sort of bring a lot of this to life, again, for various reasons and motivations. Okay. Now, the individuals and the companies who are within the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, who are really sort of driving and pushing this development and innovation, if you will, they have, again, various motivations, and they have various expectations and assumptions about sort of where this is going and how this can come about. This little clip here this is Sam Altman. If you may have not heard of him, but he's kind of a big name in the AI industry right now. He's the CEO of this company called OpenAI. They're the ones who designed this particular AI implementation known as ChatGPT. Some of you have heard of that. ChatGPT. It's in the news a lot. You know, it's a particular product. It's a particular iteration of modern AI systems, and he's the CEO of that company. And here, this is him being, I think, trying to be humorous, but also maybe not. So play that clip real quick, Miles.
I think AI will probably, like most likely, sort of lead to the end of the world. But in the meantime, there will be great companies created with serious machine learning.
Probably AI will kill us all, but until then, we're going to turn out a lot of great students.
Okay, so he's trying to, again, with humor, address that sense of dread that a lot of people have, right, with this emergence of this technology and the concerns about somehow it's taking over our lives and making decisions for us. But at the same time, he's trying to emphasize some of the potentially positive aspects of it. So again, we'll try to address some of that. Okay. These are some of the promises of AI from that individual, from Mr. Altman, that he made back in 2024. He wrote a little essay, and he talked about, I'm not going to go over all the details there, but he talked about the idea of scalability, the idea that as this technology, as they're able to scale it up, as to literally make it bigger and larger, that it's going to, improve things, improve the ability of the systems. That's actually an interesting point, and I won't go into too much today, but maybe in another session. What they're finding right now actually is that scaling doesn't actually lead to what they expect would be the results. It turns out that there's sort of a threshold, if you will, and things end up sort of plateauing. So it's like, just because you put more, more stuff, more components, more CPUs and more memory and whatever into a system, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to exponentially get, better and whatever it turns out. And there's things involved in that. There's laws of physics and mathematics that are involved in that. So it's like they end up running into sort of a barrier that they realized. Anyway, he talked about AI serving as autonomous personal assistants, coordinating medical care. Okay, and again, some people might think of that as good or bad, or positive or negative. He talks about fixing the climate, establishing a space colony, discovery of all of physics. That's a pretty big pretty big expectation. And in the end, he kind of summarized things. He said, people have an innate desire to create and be useful to each other, and AI will allow us to amplify our own abilities like never before. The interesting thing that I find about a lot of these expectations and assumptions that a lot of these technology leaders make is that a lot of what they are projecting and a lot of what they're saying is not necessarily false. I mean, there's a lot of truth in what they're saying. Where some of the doubt or apprehension or suspicion comes in, I think, for a lot of people, is in sort of the method, the how we're getting there and how they intend to get there. That's where things get a little more gray, if you will. Okay. So, like I said, here's what, from my perspective, what it's looking like is that many people are looking for this Deus ex machina, this God from the machine. Because again, there's a lot of assumption that, oh, if we just make the technology better, it's going to, again, help solve, all of our problems. Some of them are maybe a little more reserved, but there are some who are just assuming that, yeah, this is it. This is just going to fix everything. Humanity will, have a utopia, maybe. Okay. You have a couple of, again, industry leaders there, Mark Andreessen, Jan LeCun, and they, in their statements, if you see there, they literally are saying how this is going to save humanity. Like this somehow, this technology, these systems, our reliance on them is going to somehow save us. Okay, so that to me definitely is that's sort of my threshold, if you will, of credibility. I'm like, okay, let's pull it back a little bit, because again, when has humanity ever been able to save itself? Right. And again, there's this assumption that, oh, if we just make, things get better, things get bigger, whatever, there's no limits. Again, and that's kind of the fundamental of the debate is there a limit to human ingenuity and capability? Okay. At the same time, just to give them credit, they do acknowledge that certainly there are potential challenges and dangers, actually, right? Especially when it comes to the misuse of this technology. And there's unfortunately plenty of opportunity for that. Like any technology, that's the thing, right? With any kind of technology, with any kind of tool, okay, it has the ability to be used positively and negatively. And for many, as it describes there, all of this investment and energy into developing this technology, this AI, represents ultimately sort of this pursuit of knowledge, right? And mankind has always had this urge to pursue knowledge, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? Let's take a look briefly at sort of what the Bible might have to say about pursuing knowledge. Okay, God addresses that because He created us, and He created us with minds, with intelligence. And so, of course, you would imagine that God understands that we are going to have this desire, right, to learn, to know things. There's a bunch of verses there. I'm not going to go over, of course, all of them, right? But there's a few that they all address seeking knowledge, pursuing. They all address there's more than this, of course. This is just a small selection, but there's a few specific verses that I want to emphasize, just to again help us sort of apply a framework, right, as we're looking at this, to understand sort of from a spiritual sense, how should we be guided, okay, in our pursuit of knowledge. And you got Proverbs 3:5. Most of you probably have come across this one. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. And to me, honestly, this is the crux of a lot of the problems that have been occurring and that probably will occur with the use and reliance on this technology, is the leaning on our own understanding, right? Because we're so smart, we're so wise, and we're so awesome and amazing, right? We end up sometimes being blind to some of the flaws or the shortcomings that end up coming about. Okay, I like this one from Ecclesiastes. Just something about it, the way that it describes the relationship between knowledge and wisdom. It says the advantage of knowledge, okay, is that wisdom keeps its possessors alive. So you possess knowledge, that's great, right? But it's the wisdom that helps us have life, have abundant life. Okay, and then you've got this one from Philippians, and this one to me addresses a lot of aspects that have to do with, shall we say, the quality of content that's produced from this technology. Okay, the quality of content. So the idea of we got this knowledge, we've got these tools, we're using it to create and produce all these things, great. but what's the value of what's being produced? And this is a way to judge that. And again, a lot of you have encountered this verse, right? Whatever's true, whatever's honorable, whatever's right, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's commendable, if there's any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Okay. So that should definitely be part of what guides us in using these tools, using this technology to produce, whatever kind of output, whatever it is. You know, are we using these tools wisely? Are we using these tools to produce things that can edify and enhance, enhance our relationship with each other and ultimately with God? All right. So this is the framework that I would like to approach this technology with. Okay, is that again, it's a tool, and in the next slide, I think I emphasize that. Actually, this is the one word I want to emphasize, probably above everything else that we ever talk about when it comes to any kind of use of technology or anything, is discernment, right? So when somebody comes to you and presents you this, these opportunities or these options or this, hey, this can do this and this can do that and whatever, and oh, look what this did, look what this AI did, look what this AI said. Like with anything else, right? We should be using discernment to have an understanding of, is this, number one, is this valid? Is this, again, edifying? Is this, it's something positive? Is this real? Okay, is this actually authentic? Okay, so we want to use discernment. Don't get like anything else, right? Don't just take everything at face value. Try to apply a little bit of thought, critical thinking, right, to what you encounter with these kinds of tools. Okay, speaking of tools, okay, so this is my stance on this when it comes to, should we be, should we be using this? Should we be relying on this? Again, what are the, is this a positive or a negative thing? Again, ultimately, like anything else that humanity produces, it's a tool. Okay, so God, by His nature, is creative, right? He literally, He is the creator. So He created everything in existence, created the universe. We're made in God's image. Okay, and so we exhibit similar desire and ability to create. Okay, that's one of the aspects of being in the image of God, that is reflecting God's nature and character, is that we have a desire to create, and so that's a good thing in itself, right? So we create tools to facilitate our ability to create, right? Tools are not necessarily inherently good or bad. A tool is a tool. Okay, so like I have there a picture of a hammer. Okay, and a hammer is a great tool. You can do a lot of really, really amazing and constructive things with a hammer, but it's also, as we know, could definitely has potential for damage, right? And so, like as we mentioned, can be used constructively or destructively. It's all a matter, ultimately. This is again another aspect of this as we're looking at this, to apply some thought here. It comes down to choice, really. How do we choose to use the tool? Okay, if we're going to choose to use it constructively, then great. Otherwise, there's going to be some potentially negative consequences. And so the bottom line is, yes, digital technology like AI, like artificial intelligence, is a tool. It's a tool. That's all it is. Okay, so it's how do we, and when I say we, collectively, not only as the body of Christ, but we as humanity, how do we choose to use this? And it turns out, because this is playing out in real time, right? There are those who are choosing to use it constructively and those who are choosing to use it destructively. And that's just, honestly, that's just the nature of humanity, it turns out, unfortunately. And so we then need to, think about then how do we sort of maybe address or deal with those potential consequences. Okay. Okay. Many forms of AI these days. Again, it's like I say, you might not think that this impacts you or affects you directly, but whether you realize it or not, you're using AI to one degree or another. Okay, anybody have a cell phone? Gee, I don't actually have a smartphone, but most of you in here have smartphones. Okay, and guess what? These days, those devices are tied into systems that utilize this modern artificial intelligence methodology. And so, like I said, when you do like a search on your phone, you ask your phone search for this or that. That process, that act of searching, of finding information and summarizing it, very often is the product of this artificial intelligence infrastructure that's being built underneath us. Okay, so again, just about like I say, everywhere you look, in our vehicles now have it. Software, of course. When you go online and you go shopping, right? You've all seen this, right? And next thing you know, the website is recommending something to you. Hey, you might be interested in this. How does it know that, right? Because you clicked on one thing, okay, and it analyzed it and said, oh, well, this user clicked on this item, so it's based on, again, certain assumptions, right? Assuming that, well, because you clicked on that, you must be interested in that. Well, there's this other product that's similar or has similar options and features. Maybe you're interested in that. So the idea of providing recommendations for products or even media, right? Okay, if you watch streaming services, right? Netflix or something, right? This is a continual thing. And when it comes to those kinds of that particular activity of AI, I find like with so many other aspects of AI, that it certainly is not perfect, right? And that's again the nature of the machine, is that it's not perfect, because ultimately, right, what's happened, this technology, these machines, these tools are built by human beings who are flawed. And so it's kind of inevitable that the tool is going to have flaws and shortcomings. That's just, again, the nature of how that works. And so as good as the machine can become, there's still going to be these shortcomings. Okay. Anyway, going to the next. Yeah. So now let me focus in on this specific concept or implementation, in case you haven't heard of this. So the AI that we are encountering right now, in the last, I think it was since around 21 or 22, 2021, 22, is something known as generative AI. Okay, this is something very specific. So you have this concept of AI and having machines sort of simulate thinking or whatever. But in particular, what sort of accelerated the interest in artificial intelligence in the last 4 or 5 years was because of this breakthrough, if you want to call it that, of developing these systems, this infrastructure, this technology known as generative AI, which is able to take existing information and sort of recombine it in creative ways, if I can use the term creative in that sense, in creative ways, to produce output that didn't necessarily exist in that exact form. But again, the key to part of understanding this is that ultimately this, again, is based on existing material, existing content, existing knowledge. Okay, so the machine, in a sense, there are those who will be claiming that, oh, well, this is producing something new, it's producing something novel. Yes and no, in a sense. Again, it's like how we learn. Again, the idea of approaching human learning and intelligence capabilities. So you as a human being, okay, you go to school, you sit through classes, you learn things, right? So you're absorbing this information. And ultimately, at some point, you end up doing what's called synthesizing, okay? That is, you take that information and you formulate something yourself, your own curiosity, ingenuity, misguidedness, whatever it is. You end up creating something from the existing knowledge, right? That maybe didn't necessarily exist previously in that exact form. Again, there's that expression of there's nothing new under the sun, sure. But at the same time, again, the idea is this is there is a sense of creativity that is being produced by these systems. So, and like I say, it mentions there how it works is it uses what's called large reference database. So think about text, think about literature, okay? Think about anything that's ever been written. Okay, think about the internet, the web, right? As we know, go on the internet, there's a bunch of stuff out there on this internet thing, okay? And so the people who designed the systems, what they did literally was they took all that information, they put it into these systems, and they told the system, okay, analyze this information, this content, this material. And once you've done that, be prepared to then arrange and combine that information in a meaningful way to somebody who requests something of you. So the idea is that I sit in front of my computer and I go to wherever I interact with this generative AI, and I tell it something. I request something of it. Please, I tell it, please analyze, the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so it just happens that this system has a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And so it's able to take that content and analyze it and produce some kind of information in terms of a response. Now, if I told you, please, give me an analysis of the Declaration of Independence, some of us would be like, well, what is that? Right? Some of us would be, well, I remember hearing about it in school, but I can't give you very many details. Some of us might be able to recite maybe the first line, when in the course of human events, blah, 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 blah. So some of us might have different levels of recall of that information. So here's part of the difference between, like, again, the way the human mind is working and the way the machine is working. The machine has an exact copy of that content. So and this is how some people describe this. It's a perfect memorizer. Okay, so that's interesting. That sounds like that could be potentially useful, right? It can literally memorize that. It has the literal exact copy of the content available. Okay, now, I know there's some of us who maybe have eidetic memory, I guess, right? But on the average, human beings don't have that capability, right? We can look at something, and even if we do memorize it, it's like it's in there along with all the other clutter, and so we have to kind of work around what's already in the brain. The machines work a little differently. And so there's this process that's called training. That's what they call it. You'll hear about that when they bring it up in the news sometimes. They'll talk about, oh, these models are being trained on this and that or whatever. What that means is literally that they're being fed this content, this material. Here, have a copy of this, and store it and analyze and just hold on to it and be ready to do something with it later on. Okay, so this is generative AI. Okay, go ahead, Miles. Okay, and the process, again, not to get technical here. Okay, I don't want to get too technical, but how this occurs is what's called pattern and prediction analysis. Okay, and it turns out that certain types of computer processors are really good at this. They're designed to facilitate this idea of pattern recognition and pattern analysis, okay? And even predict, to kind of guess, if you will, what the next thing ought to be in this sequence of information, okay? So they've designed these computers, these chips, these systems to be able to do this. And they turns out that they do a pretty good job of that, okay? And so that has led to this modern iteration of AI, we call generative AI. And it's become, I guess, pervasive in just about everything we encounter nowadays. Our phones, our cars, all our devices, the internet itself. Okay, I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you ever go onto a web browser or just even your device, because your device does search through using a search engine, you may not realize this. But search engines themselves, since this whole sort of movement, if you will, emerged, the developers behind the search engine tools began integrating the generative AI technology into that because they realized, or they came to the conclusion, that this would be useful to provide this kind of feedback or output to the user. And so how you encounter this is when you go to your web browser and you say, let me search for whatever. What you're going to find in your web browser is near the very top of the results. Okay, so you know how search engines work, most of us, right? Put in something and it gives you back a bunch of results, links to websites that contain the information you're looking for. Okay. A while back, the thing that you would see near the very top would typically be ads, right? That was kind of annoying. Okay. Nowadays, what you're seeing at the very top is a summary produced by an AI system of the information that you're looking for. So it'll summarize it here, and then it'll stick an ad, and then it'll put the actual results you're looking for. Again, they're not getting rid of the ads, trust me. But the part of the problem, part of the challenge with that, as convenient as that might sound, so you search for something and you get this little summary at the top, you go, oh, great. You look at it, you analyze, and that's it, right? This is what happens, right? People just kind of stop there and go, well, yeah, I got my answer. I'm good. Without understanding that summary at the very top produced by this AI can have flaws, mistakes, omissions. Okay, because again, this is the nature of this technology, the nature of this machine, is that as good as it is not perfect. Okay, so we unfortunately we sometimes operate on these assumptions. We figure, well, if it's on the computer, it's coming up, so I'm assuming it's accurate. Unfortunately, it's not always the case. And so using the tool, so a way to use the tool effectively, right, is to appreciate the summary, but also consider going deeper and actually looking at the other results. This is something I've found myself in recent times, or literally in the past couple of months or so. I have had to sort of make a conscious effort to go past the top of the page. Okay, and I have to think, look, that's great, that's interesting, but let me think for myself. That's what it comes down to. Let me draw my own conclusions. And so and even more than that, my own personal shortcoming, if you will, is and you might experience this too, is that when it comes to search results in a search page, I often will not go past the first page, right? A lot of us we're like, I'll look at the first few results, and I'm like, that's good enough. And so I have found myself forcing myself, consciously making the effort to go past the first page, because you search for something, right? And how many results do you get? You get thousands. You get thousands of results. And you're like, I'm gonna look at the first, 2 or 3 or 4. Like, come on. There's literally thousands of results. Supposedly they're arranged by relevancy or priority or whatever. I'm gonna give you a little secret here. The way that results come up in a search engine, that's part of what happens, is that it's supposed to sort and arrange it by relevancy, relevant to what you specified. However, there is a technique that's been around for a while now. Some of you might have heard of this. It's called SEO. Anybody ever heard of that? SEO? Okay. It's called search engine optimization. What that means is that the person designing the web page that they want you to look at, okay, because their web page is so great and awesome, what they do is they put code in there that you don't see because it's special code that will allow the search engine to prioritize this page over another page. So that's sometimes why this page comes up closer to the top, not necessarily because it's better or has more in-depth content. It's because it's been or they pay. Yes, there is that. There is also the money factor. Sure. Again, like the advertising, right? Something that's been driving me crazy in particular. I've been using Microsoft's browser over the last few months just because convenience. But man, their search engine, it's called Bing, in case you've never used it. I know you use Google, whatever, but there's a search engine called Bing. It's from Microsoft. Most annoying thing, literally, they always put an ad at the very top, always put an ad. And it's always an ad for Amazon. So you talk about like paying, right? So I'm sure Amazon and Microsoft had a little bit of an exchange here and said, hey, make sure our stuff shows up. And so you literally get an ad for Amazon to find this thing that you're looking for, which is like, but that's not a thing that what I would find on Amazon. And yet it still shows up as, oh, find this thing on Amazon. You're like, well, but that's not something that would be on Amazon. And yet they're still going to offer it to you because that's how this system works. Anyway, let's proceed, Miles. Okay, so another term that you want to just be somewhat familiar with, it's again a little more technical term. It's called large language model. Okay, that is a description of the actual software infrastructure technology that does all of this generative AI. Okay, so most generative AI is built on something called a large language model. And again, it's just a way of describing how the system, how the machine works in finding the results that it thinks that you want, or that, I shouldn't say think, but that it deduces that you're looking for based on analyzing your input. That's what it's doing, right? So it's analyzing your input. You say, to the AI, show me an example of, whatever. And so it literally is taking your text that you typed in and breaks it up into little pieces and analyzes all the pieces and then finds results that it thinks will match and then puts that all together. It's called a large language model. Okay. And so that's how it works. Again, the tool that you often will interact with is known as a chat bot. Okay, because this is what's happened, right? In terms of our culture and our society, we become accustomed to text, chat, right? Okay, we text each other, we send messages, direct message, whatever you want to call it. And so the people designing these systems understood that, well, people are accustomed to this idea of this sort of interactive, this sort of conversational interaction, right, between parties using this text, this chat mode. So they designed these systems, the interface, to be a simple chat interface. So you say type, and you get back results, and you type again. So it's this sort of back and forth. So it feels like you're having this conversation with this thing, with this entity, okay? And taken to the extreme degree, unfortunately, people end up developing, shall we say, delusional, expectations of what this system will do or tell them. Okay, and so on the one hand, yes, it's convenient because we can just, text something or use chatting. But again, the result, there's some, shall we say, maybe unintended consequences, if you will, of sort of the implementation of some of these things. Also, you will hear this description of what's called hallucinations. When it comes to this type of AI, just generative AI will sometimes produce results that are totally inaccurate, that will be missing information, okay? And yet it presents it in such a way, in a very confident fashion, because that's what it's designed to do. The whole point is that it's trying to present you as the user this information that presumably you're going to rely on. So of course it has to present it in a way that sounds very, very consistent and very, very confident. The problem being is that sometimes that information is totally, shall we say, made up. Okay, it's totally contrived. Okay, it's wrong. Okay, and so they've come up with this description. They call that a hallucination. Okay, on the part of the machine. Okay, now there was I came across a video interview with I think it was with Sam Altman, that CEO guy, and somebody was asking him about this and saying, well, the industry has kind of come up with this description, this thing, this term to describe that erroneous result, and they're calling it hallucination. It's like, why don't you just admit that it's just wrong, it's just it's an error, it's a lie, if you will. Okay, and Sam Altman, I sympathize with this guy a lot, actually. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what he says, but I do sympathize with him where he's coming from. And he's, again, just trying to explain that, look, again, this is a machine. Okay, out of all of the people who promote this technology, and as much as Sam Altman definitely promotes it because, of course, he's making money off of it, he's also, I find, probably one of the more honest. And he explained that, look, it's a machine. It's not really thinking. It doesn't have intent or motivations. It's not lying to you in that sense. When we say lie, usually it's because somebody's trying to deceive. right? He said, look, this is just a machine. It analyzed, it did its thing, and it got some information incorrect, yes. But it wasn't lying, it wasn't malicious, it didn't have intent to deceive you. Okay, so just something to keep in mind, Miles. Okay, here's some perceptions about this generative AI that you're going to encounter. Okay, both positive and negative. So it's a tool to improve and enhance productivity. Okay, it can streamline some of those tedious tasks. That is true. I have observed that myself, sure. On the negative side, it's a tool that can manipulate content for malicious intent. So it can be used maliciously, destructively, sure. Okay. On another positive, it can be useful for summarizing and blending the ideas, techniques, content. Okay. On the negative side, it can be unreliable, inaccurate. It can induce laziness. Okay, just in a sense of, well, because again, I'm not having to necessarily apply critical thinking or analyzing or any synthesis, any of that kind of stuff. I'm just like, put in my request, get back a result. Okay, I'm just going to run with that. That's what a lot of people end up doing. And unfortunately, people, on the one hand, a lot of people are looking at this as something just very innocent or innocuous, but there are consequences, right? If you asked me a question and I gave you wrong information and you act on that, then there's consequences, right? So that's another aspect of this, okay, that we have to maybe contend with. All right, next. So let me describe some of the different forms of generative AI, the different content, if you will. It can be applied to all sorts of things: text, images, audio, and video. Okay. And on the one hand, it can be very impressive. On the other hand, it can be very unsettling. Okay. What this thing can produce. Okay. On the one hand, you can kind of in some cases you can just tell right away, oh yeah, that's produced by AI. There's a certain, shall we say, artificiality about the quality of the content. On the other hand, we have been seeing some systems that produce very realistic results. And that's maybe where some people are finding it unsettling, like, okay, how are we going to be able to detect, authentic content from what's not? That's where you get into kind of the weeds, so to speak, where you start getting into some potential concerns. This is being used. Okay. But so this technology can be applied to just about any kind of content that you can imagine that is, again, presented on a computer system. So whether it's text, images, audio, and video, they can be manipulated, they can be constructed from basic descriptions and then produce, again, what they would call this novel result. Okay. And again, our challenge becomes, how do we deal with that? How do we assess that? How do we, accept or reject that content as being valid or authentic or useful or whatever, right? So that becomes a challenge there. Okay, some potential issues, and there's a lot, it turns out. Okay, on the practical side, there's again the question of whether or not the content being produced is valid, accurate, whether it has reasonable quality. Okay, and so that's something for us as the human beings, the ones who have created this and are using this. That's up for us to be able to assess and determine, is this something that we want to continue to rely on and invest in. There's the ethical concerns, and again, there's a broad range of these. Okay, when it comes to moral and legal issues and concerns. Again, outside of just the general misuse and abuse, right? Just being used in a malicious manner. But then on the legal side, there is the very real concern about copyright and trademark infringement. Okay, so the idea of, like, if let's say you're an artist, you're a writer, you're whatever, and you produce a work, you put a lot of hard work in this thing, it's your original work, you publish it, you put it out there, the next thing you know, some generative AI system has taken your work and manipulated it or modified it or done something with it, Okay, so on the one hand, you're like, okay, that's interesting, that's creative. On the other hand, though, did you give consent for it to be used in that manner? There's an aspect of that that is a very big concern now in the legal field of, should when I say they, should these systems be using this content in this manner without permission or consent? Okay, and there's big debates. And in the next session, we'll go into a lot more detail about these kinds of issues and sort of what happened or what is happening, what has happened with how the content has been collected and curated and analyzed and so forth. And then there's the cognitive and psychological impact, right? The aspect of dependency, becoming so dependent on this technology that again, like we end up not applying our own capabilities in terms of our minds. Okay. I came across this other video I thought was very interesting. There was actually a research study done, and the individual was describing something called cognitive debt. I thought that was very interesting. And it's just literally just the idea of how the mind was simply failing to be used, failing to be applied in certain context. Okay, you could call it mental atrophy, right? What happens when your muscles aren't exercised, right, regularly? They atrophy, right? They become weak. This is what they're finding is happening with the human mind. In some cases, is that we're becoming mentally weak, atrophied, because we're not using those muscles. We're not using that critical thinking and analysis and synthesis. We're just relying on these systems, and so that's another concern. And then there's the sort of the extreme, what you might call the psychosis. There again, some people are unfortunately, becoming deluded, sort of, and clearly in some of those cases, there are some mental health concerns and mental health issues that might be present, and relying on these kinds of systems may in fact exacerbate that and make it worse. And so again, these are legitimate concerns that we need to try to consider and address. Okay, next. Okay, and then do you have the economic and environmental concerns and issues, right? Economically, and I'm sure you've this, especially in the news cycle, as this technology was emerging, of it's going to replace jobs. They're going to replace people and whatever. And what I found, at least early on, was it wasn't so much that the technology had so much capability that it was replacing people in jobs. What was happening was that employers, companies were getting rid of people with the assumption that this technology would be able to replace their roles and their tasks. And what you're finding right now actually is sort of this, the buyer's regret of like, oh, maybe this stuff isn't quite as they promised. Right. And so we're now having to hire people back. And because what ends up happening sometimes, and I find this myself in real life, is that as much as, again, these systems can produce very impressive results, at the same time, you sometimes have to, in a sense, babysit it. Okay, you have to look after it and say, okay, let me make sure that what you're producing is actually accurate and valid and authentic, whatever. So again, as much as on the one hand, it may be it's streamlining some of the work, but in a way, this kind of an ironic thing. In a way, it's actually making more work. Okay, because now we're just having to watch after it. So at some point, we anticipate that there'll be hopefully some kind of reasonable balance in that realm of the tool that can help us, that can streamline, that can make things more efficient, but it still allows me to do the kind of work that I need to do. Okay, and I'll tell you in my own, like I say, real life experiences, my own role as a programmer in the programming world, they definitely hype AI, this generative AI, quite a bit because oh yeah, I can do a lot of stuff for you, blah blah blah. Yes, but also no. Okay, I am telling you, and again, here becomes the problem. if as a programmer, I tell this generative AI, hey, look, I'm looking for some code that will do this and that for me. And the AI does its thing and it analyzes and it puts this and together and gives me some code. If I, again, operate under the assumption that that code is 100% accurate and valid, oh yeah, perfect. I'm just going to run that code and no, this does not work that way. Okay. If you try to work that way, you are going to end up with some very negative consequence because your code is going to end up with all these glitches and errors, and you're going to have to go back and fix it anyway. So the idea is that to take what is produced and again use your skill, your mental skills that God gave you. Okay, your analysis, your critical thinking, use your judgment and say, okay, and test the stupid thing, right? That's one of the problems that they found was that people in some contexts, because they get rid of a bunch of programmers or whatever, and they say, oh well, we'll just have these people put in some requests, get back some code, and we'll just go with that. Well, the people that were doing that were not as skilled or knowledgeable as the people you got rid of, because you had to pay them too much, right? So let's just pay these people here, pay them less, okay, cheaper labor, just to put in some requests, get back some code, and then we'll just run with that. No, because what ends up happening is these people don't have that knowledge and skill to be able to analyze and properly determine, is this valid? They just said, hey, this is what we got back, here you go, and let's go with it. But no, they ended up with, again, in some cases, catastrophic results. Okay, so that on the economic side, that's one aspect, and there's many others, which we'll kind of get to in more detail later. And finally, the environmental concerns. It turns out that in order for this technology to work and do what it does, as well as it does need a lot of computing power. Okay, and when I say power, I mean literally energy. Okay, electricity and infrastructure and so forth. And so that is becoming a concern in terms of the environment, because we end up having situations where they're building these large data centers, they call them, these large facilities to house all these machines that store all this information and do all this processing. Well, again, there's side effects of all that, because machines require energy, they require cooling because they get very, very hot, because there's a lot of electricity running through there. Okay, so there's all sorts of concerns when it comes to this technology, and you've got the people, you got the CEOs of these companies insisting that, well, we got to have these data centers, we got to have these large facilities to house all this stuff. Okay, but what about the impact? What about the long-term effects? Should we be taking that into consideration, and how to best approach that? Not just, oh yeah, let's just clear out 500 acres of land and build, plop down a bunch of computers. Let's maybe think about what's going to be the effect of that. Okay, let's go on. We're getting close to the end, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, so again, talking about the impacts, okay, in all sorts of areas of life, all sorts of industries, business, media, medicine. Again, there's definitely some very positive effects, positive potential impacts. We're using that technology to facilitate, to aid human efforts, right? To be able to do these kinds of jobs. Okay, so in business, again, the idea is optimizing the various kinds of operations. Again, streamlining the work, and again, like I said, yes, it can do that. Absolutely. Okay, it has the facility, it has the ability to take the tedious work that a lot of us have to do on a daily basis, and to reduce the amount of time that takes. So that's a positive thing. So it's like less time doing sort of these silly, run around kind of work, and apply ourselves more to some of the higher level, maybe administrative tasks or troubleshooting tasks or whatever. With media, we're seeing this in the various media industries, film and TV and music, right? Again, there's definitely some positive aspects there of streamlining some of the processes to produce the output. So like with a film, when it comes to not just the filming, but the post-production, right? The special effects or synchronizing the voices with the with the video, all that kind of stuff. That that could be a positive thing. That's a way to aid those who are producing this content to be maybe more efficient. And in the field of medicine, certainly, again, because of the fact that these generative AI systems have, in a sense, this content, this medical content, right? This information about diagnosis and analysis and disease and whatever. And so, again, to me, I'm like, okay, let's make sure we have balanced expectation here. But what you're finding is that there are those who are just, again, assuming and expecting that, oh, the AI is going to it's going to cure cancer. I don't know if the AI is going to cure cancer. Maybe some, doctors and researchers can use the AI, right, to help them find cures. Okay, so it's all, sometimes it's all in the presentation. It's all in the way people are expressing these anticipations, these being optimistic. Like, yes, it can probably help, but is the machine going to do the work? Is it going to fix it for us? Again, Deus ex machina, right? God from the machine. Is there, do we have God from the machine, or do we realize, as believers, of course, we rely on God himself directly? Okay, we're not relying on the machine to do the work. We can use the machine, and in many cases, we can use the machine to do God's work, right? Okay, but God is not in the machine. God is God. Okay, go ahead, Miles. Okay, on the negative side, these are actual incidents that have occurred in the last few years. So these are actual headlines that you might have encountered, you might have heard about in the news. Okay, involved in individual suicide. Now, involved meaning that the individual interacted with the system, got back certain results that seemed to affirm his thought and intentions. Okay, and this is what these systems do. I'll mention this here just on the side very briefly. These systems, the large language models in particular, are designed, it turns out, for very specific reasons, are designed to be very affirming in their responses. And that makes sense in some sense. That makes sense. It's like when we ask this system, this machine, this and that or whatever, and the idea is that they want to give back a result or a response that doesn't seem, on the one hand, too neutral, too mechanical, if you will. And at the same time, they wanted to, again, remember, part of their goal was to try to make these things somewhat human, or feel human in a sense. So what you end up with is, unfortunately, people maybe with issues, right, with personal issues, putting input into these systems and getting back results or responses that ultimately just affirm what they put in. Say, yeah, that sounds reasonable, sure. So I mean, I'm kind of exaggerating it here, but if as a person, if I put in, how do I commit suicide? Okay, the machine might just tell you how to do it. Okay, without thinking that maybe that's not a good thing. Okay, and that becomes part of the issue of how we use these tools, right? It's the how we use the tool itself. It's not necessarily at fault. Again, in this case, they were trying to sue the company. I don't know, honestly. I don't know what the level of liability would be there. I mean, again, it's a tool. Okay, do you blame the hammer when you hit your thumb? I mean, some of us probably do, but is it really the hammer's fault when you hit your thumb, right? So there's definitely some room for debate there. Okay, all sorts of examples of potential negative impacts there. Okay, publishing material that was totally contrived, totally false, totally fake. Okay, but because somebody didn't take the time to review it, to say, hey, is this actually real? They just put in some prompt, put in some input, got back some result, and say, oh, that looks good, published it. Okay, and people using that information, realize that, hey, this stuff doesn't even exist. Okay, so there are consequences, and I think people maybe, I don't know why they didn't realize, but maybe they didn't fully realize, what the consequences could be from disseminating fake or false information. It's like, well, that's, you would think common sense would help guide you in that. But anyway, go ahead, Mike. Okay. Now, in my field, out besides IT, again, because I'm in the education field, this becomes, again, a very specific concern, again, regarding how it's being used. So again, on the positive side, definitely the AI systems, the generative AI systems can definitely be utilized in a very positive way to facilitate learning, to help students, have some kind of agency in their learning, to identify and locate information that's relevant to what they're trying to study. They can, it can deliver resources more directly to them, help them organize their work. Okay, so there's some potential positive aspects there, but of course on the negative side, right? Like anything, like I said, like anything else, any tool can be, negative or positive. We are seeing quite a bit of this cheating and plagiarism. That's just because, again, the idea because it's so easy, right? That's part of the problem, is because it's so easy. You just type something in, get something back, and you just submit that and say, hey, look, I wrote an essay. Well, you didn't really. Okay, something else, put together a bunch of words in a way that seems very natural, very realistic, because that's what it does. That's what's designed, programmed to do. Okay, but you did not apply your own cognitive ability of analysis and synthesis, whatever. So this is what we're seeing. Again, discouraging original thought, critical thinking, overemphasizing the output, the result, rather than the actual learning, right, of the subject matter. Okay, so these are some of the concerns we're facing, okay, when it comes to, like, in the realm of education. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so real quick, as we're wrapping this up here, some of you might have gotten a link to a video like this, okay? And so I went ahead and analyzed it, reviewed it. I got through it on your behalf, so you didn't have to, okay, in case you didn't. Go ahead and play it's the first few seconds of this.
Elon Musk's XAI is now rolling out Grok 4.
Grok 4.
XAI team was there to unveil Grok 4. This is the latest artificial intelligence system.
Grok's AI was told to find contradictions in the Bible, and instead it found something else entirely. People expected it to confirm what critics have claimed for centuries. But instead, Grok uncovered hidden architecture no one imagined. Patterns echoing the same logic found in DNA, galaxy spirals, and advanced software. A machine built to question belief stumbled into something it couldn't easily explain. And the way it responded was disturbingly calm, almost like it recognized what it was looking at.
Okay. There are so many things wrong with this video. So many things wrong with this video on different levels. So let me take the superficial level. Go ahead. Okay. This is an example, and this is not to be mean or anything, but this is an example of what now has become to be called AI slop. Okay. Number one, it's very sensationalistic. Okay. It, like, literally, when I first saw it, it made me think of, like, the National Enquirer. Hey, did you hear about this? Oh, did you know that? It's just this very sensationalistic, very overly melodramatic presentation. It's definitely clickbait. The idea of, what clickbait is, when you see something described in a way that is going to, entice you to click on it. And it definitely has questionable quality. Now, this particular video, so I'm to analyze the video itself right now, real quick. The video itself is in fact AI generated. Okay, so that's a little bit of irony there. And it says it right on the page. Okay, this is a statement from the channel that produced this particular video. And I have to confess, maybe without realizing, I had actually viewed other videos from this channel previously, just again out of curiosity. Again, I succumbed to the clickbait, okay, and I was curious. And so, but when I went to the channel's description, Okay, it says that the content presented in our videos is intended solely for entertainment purposes. While we may draw upon facts, rumors, and fiction, viewers should not interpret any part of the content as factual or definitive information. Please enjoy responsibly. There's also a disclaimer or a what's it called? Disclosure that YouTube now requires you, if you are a person that creates video content for YouTube, they require you to put this disclosure on your video page if your video was produced using AI generation, altered or synthetic content, sound or visuals were significantly edited or digitally generated. So the video itself was and that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, right? I'm just make sure I make that clear. Producing or using AI to produce content is not in itself bad. We understand that at this point. Okay, it's just a tool. It's, we use it one way or another. But now let me really give you a very quick a summary of the content of that video, what it's claiming. The claims are based on someone's interpretation of generative AI results of a large language model. They talked about this thing called Grok. That's one of the many models out there, one of the products. Okay, besides like ChatGPT, you'll hear about Grok. That's produced by Elon Musk's company. I can't remember, it's called XAI. There's a product called Claude. There's something called Gemini. There's a bunch. Okay, there's plenty out there. Okay, this one, for whatever reason, they chose this thing called Grok. They put in supposedly a prompt or an inquiry about finding contradictions in the Bible. Okay, I'm going to tell you absolutely conclusively, Grok AI did not objectively validate the Bible, but that's the impression that the video was trying to get you. The way I know this, right? The way I know this with absolute certainty, and anybody here could do exactly the same thing I did. What did I do? I went to Grok and I put in find contradictions in the Bible. I can share those results with anybody if you're interested in. What it gave back was simply a list of alleged contradictions and the reasons why some people think it's a contradiction and the reasons why some people don't think it's a contradiction. So it was actually, to give it credit, it was actually very balanced in its result. But keep in mind what was happening when I did that. When I asked Grok, large language model, find contradictions in the Bible, what did it do? It looked inside of its repository of information that already existed and found all this information about supposed contradictions and arranged all of them and said, okay, here, this is what people think about this. The machine did not conclude anything. The machine didn't analyze or think about it, didn't make any judgments. So be careful about when you come across this kind of material that's making these claims and those kind of claims. Bottom line, the machine, as of right now at least, the machine does not make judgments, does not think in the same way that we think. It just doesn't, because that's not what's designed to do. It doesn't have the capability to do the same kind of thinking that a human mind does. Okay, Miles? Okay, so there's a bunch of misconceptions, challenges, and apprehensions about this technology. Okay, again, we have a tendency, we all do it, we have a tendency to impart human qualities to inanimate objects, right? We refer to our cars as, he or she, refer to as, vehicles in a personal manner. And so it's sort of a natural inclination to want to refer to this machine as if it's a living. It's not. Okay, it's just not. It has this illusion because it does a very good job these days. The large language models do a very good job of presenting statements in a very conversational way that sound like, oh, that's like as if I was talking to a person or human being. But again, it's been programmed. That's what it's been programmed to do, is to simulate that, right? For our comfort. That's why it does that. Okay, so that we're not so apprehensive and and anxious about talking to this cold hard machine. No. Oh, it's talking like a person. So okay, so kind of interact and cooperate. Okay. There is, in my estimation, again, from what I have seen and what I observed, some of the motivation behind the development of this, honestly, probably does stem from a little bit of hubris and ego. Okay, and again, if you listen to some of the things that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, has said, he is very optimistic. He's very confident to the degree that, I have to wonder, well, gee, I have to wonder about some of his motivations with that regard. The paradox with something like this, with this machine concept, ultimately, again, in sort of seeking, again, this deus ex machina, this God from the machine, part of the paradox there is that ultimately some of us end up worshiping what's created rather than the creator, right? That's from Romans, right? Some of you remember that verse, Romans 1:25. They end up, abandoning trust and faith and hope in an actual living God, and they end up somehow, worshiping idols, worshiping things that they create. But isn't that a weird kind of a paradox? Like, you made this thing. It's not like it's somehow above you or better than you, and yet you are submitting to it. To me, that's kind of an interesting paradox. And again, another irony is the fear aspect, right? And again, that's on the other extreme where it's doom and gloom and AI is going to take over and destroy the world. So we end up fearing what we create. So we worship it, and then we also fear it. So it's kind of an interesting, weird, ironic, paradoxical sort of thing. Okay. And again, a lot of this stems from looking for God elsewhere. Okay. If you're not going to rely on God as God, then you end up looking for it somewhere else. Deus ex machina. Maybe God's in the machine. Maybe he's over there. Maybe he's, whatever. Or even wanting to be God. Right. So here's some statement from this is an interview, I should say. If I'm going to ask you to put aside any opinions or preconceptions you may have about this individual here. He did an interview with Sam Altman short time ago, and he was confronting Sam about the concept of morality in the machine. Personally, it was a very interesting interview on both sides, the questions and the answers. It was very interesting, but personally, I thought that Mr. Carlson's assumptions and preconceptions maybe were a little misaligned. Because from what I was hearing, he kind of was taking the approach, again, as if this a living thing, as if somehow it was this real living thing. But anyway, go ahead and play this little clip here real quick.
So if it's nothing more than a machine and just the product of its inputs, then the two obvious questions, like what are the inputs? Like what's the moral framework that's been put into the technology? Like what is right or wrong according to GPT?
Do you want me to answer that one first?
I would.
Question.
Yeah.
So on that one, someone said something early on in ChatGPT when that really has stuck with me, which is one person at a lunch table said something like, we're trying to train this to be like a human, like we're trying to learn like a human does and read these books and whatever. And then another person said, no, we're really like training this to be like the collective of all of humanity. We're reading everything, we're trying to learn everything. We're trying to see all these perspectives. And if we do our job right, all of humanity, good, bad, a very diverse set of perspectives, some things that we'll feel really good about, some things that we'll feel bad about, that's all in there. Like this is learning the kind of collective experience, knowledge, learnings of humanity.
So, like I said, I kind of sympathize with Mr. Altman there, just to a degree. He, in a sense, he's trying to be neutral, okay, about this. Now, you may agree or disagree whether that should be a valid approach. Like, should you be neutral to this type of system that is going to end up informing individuals about various various subjects. Okay, and like he mentioned, well, these systems, they're just going to contain everything. Well, that makes sense. I mean, that seems like a fair thing. So then what's the answer, in a sense? What is the answer to, well, then how do we help ensure that this tool, remember, this is just a tool, but how do we ensure that this tool is not going to be used destructively? Okay. Now, again, to give these guys credit, the tech guys, give them some credit. They do definitely, mention the concern and the need for certain, shall we say, safeguards built into the systems. So, for example, right now, if you go in and say something like, I apologize here, but if I say, how do I commit suicide? Now, the system will not answer you. It will try to direct you to resources that maybe will provide some kind of therapy, right? So in other words, they are trying to build into the systems. They're trying to, in a sense, catch these inputs that maybe are questionable. And he admits that later on in the interview. He talks about that, about how they're trying to do. And that in itself, to me, that's interesting because, again, that's telling me that, well, so you are making judgments. You are applying a sort of a moral framework, really. If you are actually deciding that, well, we shouldn't have the machine support this, but support that, then you really are ultimately making certain moral judgments about how this is being implemented and how it's being used. So anyway, just to finalize this, the root of all of this whole search for knowledge and God from the machine, it goes back to the beginning, right? In Genesis, humanity sought knowledge apart from God. That was the problem. That was the original sin, right? Was that humanity said, well, yeah, you've got this God, this amazing God who literally knows everything, but maybe we can explore, things on our own. And so the deception was in being persuaded that being like God, remember what the serpent said to Eve, right? The serpent mentioned like, oh, well, God doesn't want you to be like him. He doesn't want you to know good and evil. So humanity was persuaded for some reason that this was somehow being withheld from us. That, oh, God doesn't want us to be like God. God doesn't want us to know good and evil. But here's the thing. We're already made in God's image. So we're like God we reflect God in that sense. And when it comes to knowledge, if we really wanted to know about good and evil, we had the source, the literal source of everything. We could have just asked him. Okay. So the whole point, some people are very critical of this concept in the Bible and in Genesis about, oh, God set up a trap. God was using entrapment on Adam and Eve. How cruel is that? What God did was he gave us the opportunity, right, to demonstrate either relying and trusting on him. Again, if we wanted to know about, whoa, what's this good and evil thing? We can either go to the God who made us and knows all this. We could have just asked him. Say, hey, let's have a conversation here, God, about this. Or, oh, there's this thing over here. Let me just do this on my own. Right? That was the sin. That was the downfall. Okay? So in the end, we are not called to seek or rely on any kind of deus ex machina, God from the machine. Rather, we are called to exercise integrity, faith, and what? Discernment. Okay, so when you come across this stuff and it sounds sensational and it sounds, very exaggerated and very, wow, this is amazing discovery, blah, blah, blah. Use a little discernment, take a moment and sort of think about and analyze and sort of look at how is this being presented and what's the content. And if you have to, like I did, go to the source, go to the AI thing, don't be scared of it, right? Just go to the AI and say, okay, tell me, what do what can you provide with regard to this topic? Let me see what you have to say about this topic, based again on the repository of all existing knowledge that we have at this time. Okay, so that's what I have to say. So this was meant to be sort of an introduction to the series here. Like I said, in the next session, We're going to go more into the details of the different types of generative AI, because that's, again, what is prominent right now. The generative AI, the Grok and the Chat GPT and the Claude and all these things. People are using these things, again, positive and negative. So I think it would be useful for us to have a little bit of an understanding of sort of what these things are, how they work, how they can be used, and how they maybe ought not to be used. And I think in the last session, we're going to go back over into detail about some of those issues and concerns we talked about the moral and the legal and the impacts in economy and environment and all that. We'll kind of dwell on those things. All right. So just for maybe a few minutes here, if there's any questions or comments about this, we could run the mic around if you have any.
I have about 100 questions. I will ask AI. No, just kidding.
Yes.
Citizens of the king, citizens of another kingdom. The last things he said to us was, go into all the world, make disciples, teach, preach, baptize, teach them, and I'll be with you always. I guess the question I have here is how to use AI to accomplish those goals. I mean, maybe that's going to come up, but I just that's kind of where I am at. And this stuff's great, but what is that going to do for the advancement of the gospel?
Right.
And how do we use it for the advancement of the gospel?
Right. Like you said, yeah, we'll definitely try to address that. Exactly. That's what, yeah, like I said, what I wanted to cover today was just to kind of give you an intro into sort of what it is we're facing, right? What is this AI thing that we're looking at? But we'll definitely, like I said, it's a tool, right? And so we use tools all the time in the body of Christ, in the kingdom of God. We use tools to advance the kingdom, absolutely. And so this can be, like anything else, it can be used for that benefit. And again, the idea is, like, number one, understanding, like I say, what it is and what it does and what it can do and what it can't do. Okay. So for example, like that video that I was analyzing and critiquing, on the one hand, somebody might say, oh, that's a perfect way of using the AI tool to, spread the truth, and maybe or maybe not, because again, there's so many questionable aspects of that particular result or product that it might undermine some of the authenticity of the message. Okay. Yes, brother.
Well, I think you've already answered where I'm going with my question, because it's a lot to consider and think. Okay. And what's key is when you say kind of look at, well, not kind of, but it's a tool. Okay. And then if you think of it as in that aspect, but it has a somewhat of an analytic way to me, meaning that we're being analytic of our own analysis, which will come back to haunt us. Okay, because the word of God came to men through the Spirit of God, not by what man does himself. So it seems to me that it is an analytic thing of an analysis, of a gathering analysis that we as human beings, as you mentioned from the beginning, like in the Garden of Eden, so to say, that conversation. So if you take that conversation on in an Eve way, so to say, then you can expect the destruction that comes behind it. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
I just have a quick thought. I mean, I wrote many different thoughts. Certainly, thank you so much, Vincent, for giving us such a thorough presentation. It's very deep, very detailed, a lot of great content. And from what I can feel and I see, it's like two things for me. We need to exercise discernment Absolutely. This is paramount. This is why I think maybe from what this tonight's message for me, use discernment. Don't rely on that like blindly, because it's great. It's very great thing because it's a helper. Basically, it's a tool. It's supposed to help me, but not to replace me. And if it starts replacing, like we could probably have an AI pastor. Could be better pastor, you know? You could just thought, okay, but you know, we need somebody that has compassion, who can love us, who can listen to us, and be human, right?
Right.
So definitely need of discernment, and not replace what we have, like something that is authentic, fellowship, genuine, love, care, faith, all of these things. So I definitely one thing I'm kind of a little bit scared in a good way, not in a bad way, but like I realize that my children probably and my grandchildren, right, they're going to be living in a maybe very different reality and world, unless all these things that we can preserve, like as human beings, as a church, and connected to the most, the greatest mind of God, right? If we're still connected, then we will be able to exercise the discernment. Without Him, without the Word of God, we are just going to be very easily misled. Right. And that's why I think this great deception, that the Bible talks about, I think maybe AI can be kind of some way connected to that. Sure. So let's abide in the truth. Let's dwell in the Word of God. Let's exercise our discernment, and I think God will keep us. Yeah.
Sarah Alice, did you have a?
I have no questions at this time. I just would like to provide two examples to illustrate sort of the power of AI in the generative AI sense. An example of a hallucination and an example of what I consider a positive use of it. Though not everyone will consider it a positive use, but that's the problem with moral judgments and using these tools. But for a hallucination, just to help illustrate how these things can be used thoughtlessly and can cause problems if you aren't critical thinking. The other day, I heard about this new tax law going into effect and how there could be a tax break for citizens who bought a new car. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I bought a new car. Let's see how that affects me. And they're like, oh, yes, if it's manufactured in the USA and then the interest on your payments will be tax-free. And I was like, okay, cool. I went to Google and I typed in, I have a Hyundai Sonata. Our Hyundai Sonatas 2025 built in the USA, manufactured in the USA. And the AI summary right at the top said, yes, Hyundai Sonatas 2025s are made in the USA. I went, great. Can the Hyundai Sonata 2025 qualify for the new tax break, Yes, the new tax break, that was introduced, will qualify for new cars manufactured in the USA, such as Hyundai Sonatas. I went, perfect, nice, I don't have to worry about that. But because I'm me, I looked into some articles on this new tax law, and they're like, yes, this is how it works. This is what it does. You will know that your car is correct if its VIN number starts like this. And I went, oh, okay. I know my VIN number, so let me go look it up. Here's my copy. Yes, my VIN number does not start with that. Look up another article. Yes, your VIN number will start with this. Wait a minute. I go onto Hyundai's website and they have a section for this new tax law. They go, yes, our cars do qualify if it's this, this, or this. Hyundai Sonata is not this, or this. AI hallucinated. It thought it could tell me what I wanted to hear. It knew that Hyundais were qualified, and it probably saw that in its material and went, boom, here. I'm predicting that this is what will give you the best answer. It was not the best answer, and if I had followed it, there might have been consequences. Maybe not, but there might have been. could be audited someday and have problems with that. So that's one way that if you're not looking into what you're getting from AI, you can have problems. On a more positive front, my sister's going to be so mad at me, but on a more positive front, my sister really has strong feelings about art, generative AI for art, like for images. I have mildly strong feelings about it, and I don't tend to use generative AI for images nowadays. But when it was a novel thing years ago, this group that I was in got access to an image generator. And I was like, oh, this is cool. It could use, I could make portraits for characters that I'm designing or this or that. Didn't use it for anything like that. What I used it for was that for a very long time, I'm a writer, and I had a metaphor in my head. I saw children in fog. There's this chain link fence, and they're under a yellow moon. What does that mean? What is this image? This isn't a yellow moon. This isn't just some empty field of fog with a chain link fence. So this is some picture that I can't figure out. Because, you know, just because my brain can see it doesn't mean I know what I'm trying to say. Some of you might have that problem. And I went, I could use AI generation to help me visualize what this is. So I told AI, chain link fence, fog, 3 children under a yellow moon. And it gave me this picture, and I could see this picture. And with this picture, my brain went, you're looking at a basketball court with a street lamp shining down on kids playing basketball. That is the image that you have been trying to build. I have it now. I haven't used it, but I wanted to know what I've been seeing, and I couldn't do it on my own. There are other ways I could have found it. I could have Google image searched, which might be using AI in its own ways. I could have drawn it myself. I could have asked someone to draw it. But the opportunity costs of those were greater than what I was willing to pay at that time. So I used generative AI, and I found my answer. I was able to give myself closure of what this metaphor was. And to me, that is a positive use. Now, the AI generation, when they scraped the internet and pulled all their images, they didn't do it very ethically. They didn't follow copyright law. I may have used pieces from that image, could have been copyrighted pieces. It could be a poisoned well, and therefore we don't want to use a poisoned well. But in that instance, I was able to get something positive from it. So that's a perspective to consider. And there are my illustrations. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke. Thank you. You know, talking about the search engine thing, another thing about that, by the way, something I actually found out recently. On some reason I didn't know this beforehand. But, you know, I assume that when you go to Google or go to Bing or whatever, and you do the search, that it was actually searching the web like the search engine normally does. The LLM part of it does not. The large language model only uses its repository of it. In other words, the large language model is not real time. I thought that was actually very interesting. And that could explain why it wouldn't always have the most up-to-date or accurate information, you know, about things. So good point.
I have a question which you might not like. Why don't you have a phone?
Oh, why don't I have? I technically do have a cell phone. It's one of those little flip phones, prepaid. Okay. I keep it in my car. I don't have a smartphone for a number of reasons. I'm just actually, it turns out I'm really bad with mobile devices. I have an iPad tablet, but I'm really bad with mobile devices for some reason. There's a running joke in my family that I have fat fingers. And that's why I just mess up all the time trying to type on these things. I personally don't have a specific use for something like a smartphone. I don't need it. So anyway,
but do you have a number?
I do have a Google phone number if you really need to contact me.
I think I'd love to have that.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much for.
Okay, let's wrap up in prayer. We will pray And we also have an offering. If you brought the offering, you're welcome to contribute to the offering.
Oh, we didn't did anybody on Zoom have any kind of questions or comments?
Actually, yeah, I did want to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, cool. I did want to make a. I'm not gonna chew out Luke. Don't worry. No. I thought something that Pavel said. Give me a second. My social anxiety is flaring up because I'm talking to people. What Pavel was talking about with he could be replaced by an AI as a pastor, but then he was like, oh, but it's important as a pastor to have the human aspects, the love and the compassion and stuff like that. And when he was talking about that, I was like, yeah, not just the love and compassion, but also the being able to be critical, being able to talk back and disagree, which is something you mentioned during the actual message that AI, generative AI specifically, tends to just kind of like hype you up, kind of agree with you, and just kind of like the term glaze. It just tends to glaze you or just give you what you want to hear. But an important part of like not just like pastoral shepherding or just humanity in general is the feedback, not just positive, but also the negative or neutral or whatever, but being able to like brush up against the grain and be able to the saying goes, iron sharpening iron. There has to be that friction there. Otherwise it's just gonna nothing's gonna the knife's not gonna get sharp. It's just gonna be moving. So I thought that was interesting. Pavel mentioned that, and I'm like, yeah, the love is important, the compassion is important, but disagreeing is important sometimes too. So yeah, I just wanted to comment that.
Thank you, Tamar.
Maybe somebody else has a question on Zoom. Okay, well, if you have questions, I have like about a little bit more questions. I could actually send it to you.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, maybe you can email it to Vincent and just ask him something that maybe like provoked something in your thinking, in your heart. I'm certainly feel that I need to take a break from some of the tools that I'm using with AI because I feel like I'm sometimes over rely on them in some instances, but I definitely see a lot of pros, a lot of there are cons definitely, and thank you so much. Thank you again. This is a very thorough, very deep, very I don't know the yes, Sas.
Okay, I want to say thank you. And that's what I have questions and I have responses and all that, but I'm not into that right now. I want to say thank you to our particular group for having Miles. I mean, and having this whole family and for thinking, having them think with us, because I read that article, and I thought it was one of the dumbest things I ever read. The video thing. I said, this doesn't relate to that, and that's not part of that. The Bible never said that. Where's he getting this stuff from? It was, but I didn't know where to go with it. Am I supposed to tell you I don't like it and what I don't like? I almost wrote you a long thing about it. I was so upset about that. But then I thought, no, it's a waste of my time and you don't have time to read it either. So, where do I go with these questions? Where do I go with these thoughts, these doubts, these like, was it Tamar, iron, sharpening iron? You know, like it says, what do I do with that? And I'm grateful that our church didn't say, well, okay, that's just for the business people. We'll have a seminar over there for them. Or some people just aren't smart enough for this, so we don't have to talk about this. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that I didn't understand, but there's things I did understand too. And I'm glad that it's being addressed. Thank you. This is important, I think. And this is, thank you.
All right. Any last comments before we go and drink some coffee? But we have a benediction. Yes. Thank you.
I just too want to say thank you very much, Vincent. I learned so much. Oh, wow. Yeah. Thank you for leading us in. I just have some words from Ephesians to take with us this week. To him who by means of his power working in us is able to do so much more than we can ever ask for or even think of. To God be the glory in the church and in Jesus Christ for all time, forever and ever. Amen. Go in peace and stay for coffee and snacks and fellowship.